The Mark by Maurice Nicoll. Physical and Spiritual Man, Part 1. A man touches the earth with his physical feet, but he touches life with his psychological feet. His most external psychological level is sensual, a matter of sensation, a matter of the senses. That is, his most external thinking and feeling arise from what he perceives from sense. This level represents the feet of his psychological being as distinct from the feet of his physical being, and the kind of shoes which cover his feet represent his particular views, opinions, and attitudes that he wears or uses in his approach to sense-given life. Without your five senses, external life would not exist for you. How does a man walk the earth? We speak here psychologically. How does his outermost psychology relate itself to external life? Now, a man who understands life only through the evidence of his senses is not a psychological man. He is a sensual man. His mind is based on sense. This is called somewhere else the mind of the flesh. In such a case, he thinks from his feet and has no head. Most particularly, he thinks from what shoes cover his feet. This is his form of truth, different in different cases, but of the same order or level. He is as yet far from being a man. He thinks literally. He takes a parable literally. But to become a man, one must begin to think apart from literal sense. What is significant to anyone who craves internal development is to think psychologically. Why, for example, is it said so often in esoteric literature, as in the scriptures, that a man must remove his shoes before entering a sacred place? It means that the sensual mind cannot understand psychological truth, so he is told to remove his shoes, that is, his sense-based truth, because the mind based on the senses and the truth formed from their evidence is not capable of comprehending a higher order or level of truth, that is, psychological truth. To put the matter in other terms, the psychological man cannot comprehend the spiritual man. So, when it is said that it is necessary to take off one's shoes before entering a sacred or holy place, it signifies that the sensual cannot comprehend the spiritual. Sensual thought cannot touch a level above itself. Another kind of thinking is required. The mind is at different levels, and its lowest level cannot grasp the working of higher levels. To try to understand psychological truth with the lowest, most external level of the mind is impossible. So those shoes must be removed when entering into the sphere of knowledge above sense knowledge. To drag psychological understanding down to the level of sensual understanding is to destroy everything in man that can lead to his internal development and make him a man inwardly. People try to understand God and the divine with their sensual mind. They try to understand with their shoes, not their head. When the angel appeared to Moses in the burning bush, he said to Moses, "Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereupon thou standest is holy ground." Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. And when the angel with the drawn sword stood before Joshua, when he came to Jericho, he said to Joshua, "Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, for the place whereon thou standest is holy." Joshua, verse 15. The disciples of Christ who were sent out to preach the gospel had to go without shoes. Provide neither shoes. Matthew chapter 10. A man has an organized physical body given to him. He then comes under the organization of the civilization to which we belong. This social organization is kept going by means of laws. A man commits murder. The laws of his country condemn him. But man has not a psychological body. He has no inner organization. He obeys the laws out of fear and for the sake of avoiding scandal. In himself, if all restraints were abolished, he would murder those he hates. Hate is a deep factor. In one sense, it is possible to say we all hate one another. We are told, "Thou shalt do no murder." Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. Literally taken, this command is kept because of the fear of consequences. Psychologically, it means that one must do no murder in one's thoughts or feelings. It is just in this inner sphere that the inner development can take place. It is the psychological meaning of the command. The feet and the head. The psychological man is constantly the theme of vision, parable, and dream. He is divided variously into outer and inner parts. This is the same as lower and higher levels. The head represents the highest or inmost division of the psychological man. To mix the thinking of the feet, the shoes, with that of the head is to confuse two levels. The thinking of the feet forms the shoes and is sensual, and so it concerns the outer objects of sense. The thinking of the head is psychological, and so concerns the inner meaning of things. These two orders of truth are not contradictory, but become so if they are viewed as opposites. They are not opposites, but on different levels. So there are different forms of truth on different levels. But if a man thinks only from his feet, he cannot understand levels. He thinks only on one level, and so turns things into opposites which are not opposites. So it comes about that when people lose all sense of levels, of higher and lower, the world turns into opposites and violence. The naked man. In psychological language, clothes, covering, garments denote what the psychological man wears, that is, what truth he follows. So the naked man is man naked psychologically, without mental clothes. He is the man without a psychology, without any kind of truth. It is said in Revelation, "Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked, and they see his shame." Revelation chapter 16, verse 15. The meaning is psychological, not physical. But what must be clothed? In one place it is said that the king was naked. "When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the angels with him, then shall he sit on the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all the nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as the shepherd separateth the sheep from the goats, and he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungred, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in, naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me." Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 to 36. By the king, then, something in oneself is meant. Many assume they follow truth, but what in them does? The question apparently is the king in oneself clothed? It seems the king is there already, and it is a question of clothing him or not. This king in oneself is either naked or clothed. Also, people do good without knowing it. That is from goodness. Does not the parable go on to say, "Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungred, and fed thee, or athirst, and gave thee drink? And when we saw thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? And when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and come unto thee?" And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it unto one of these my brethren, even these least ye did it unto me. Matthew chapter 25, verses 37 to 40. We understand that the physical man is composed of visible flesh and blood and bones. We do not understand that the psychological man is composed of invisible thoughts and feelings and desires. What he thinks and desires determines the quality of the psychological man. But while the given physical body is ordered and can work harmoniously, the psychological body is not given, and is by no means ordered. A man may think one thing, feel another, and desire a third. From this point of view, man's task is to bring about order in the psychological body, which is in disorder. For this reason, there has always existed a literature, under various guises, that does not refer to the physical, but to the psychological man, as for example the fragments of teaching preserved in the Gospels and many other fragments. But again we are going wrong, because this psychological man is in some way already there in us, only we have to clothe him. Shall we say then that he is either naked or wrongly clothed, and that the task is to cover him from foot to head in the right garments? Recollect that the king apparently is there, either naked or clothed, and that in these cases where he is left naked, the person has fouled, and in those cases where he is clothed, the person has not fouled. Wash the feet in water in a basin. To purify the thinking, change the mind, is symbolized by washing with water. This is washing the mind from the senses. The basin is the receptive vessel to hold the water, to concentrate him. The feet are the lowest mind in contact with the external world. They must be changed in this life. After that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Then cometh he to Simon Peter, and Peter saith unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto him, What I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Peter saith unto him, Thou shalt never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Simon Peter saith unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus saith to him, He that is washed needeth not to say to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. John chapter 13, verses 5 to 10. Part 2. In the first 5 books of the Old Testament, called the Pentateuch, and attributed to Moses, a great number of extraordinary stories are found, which are usually regarded as historical. For example, there is the story of Pharaoh and the butler and the baker, which occurs in Genesis 40, which apparently has no particular meaning, and as it stands seems quite trivial. However, it is susceptible of being understood as having an inner meaning. Or again, there is the great story about Moses getting the children of Israel out of Egypt, and the power of Pharaoh, Exodus. But this, no doubt, can again be taken historically, that is, in the sense that Egypt means Egypt and Pharaoh means Pharaoh, just as in the previous example, the butler can be taken as the actual butler and the baker as the actual baker. Let us take the movement of the children of Israel out of Egypt, and their journey towards the promised land, not literally, but as a parable having a psychological significance quite apart from any historical significance. Let us take it, in other words, as referring to man moving away from some power signified by Pharaoh in Egypt, and journeying towards a new state of himself. All esoteric teaching concerns a lower and a higher level, and the essence of esotericism consists in the fact that man is capable of undergoing a transformation and attaining a new level of himself. Man has to escape from the power of Pharaoh in Egypt and move in another direction, first signified as the wilderness and eventually as the promised land. One can see in the allegory how difficult this is, for it is shown how Pharaoh will not let the children of Israel leave Egypt, although plague after plague is brought upon him. Man, glued to the senses, to visible reality, to external life, can only move with great difficulty to a level of comprehension which lies beyond the facts of the senses and their power over him. This is the first problem of esoteric teaching, and in the parable the emphasis is put upon the power of Pharaoh, which Moses tries to overcome. Pharaoh represents the power of the lower level, and Moses the power of the higher level. Moses having been told by God to get the children of Israel out of Egypt, Egypt representing a psychological state of humanity. The many different sides of a man which can grow into a new inner development are firmly held down in Egypt by Pharaoh, i.e., by the power of the lower level of understanding, gained solely through the world as it appears to the senses, and the understanding that we gain from this first source of meaning. This level of interpretation is Egypt, and Pharaoh is the concentrated power of this level. He can be compared with the ruler of the feast in the parable of the marriage at Cana. See page 179, which we shall come to later. Let us look at some definitions in the Old Testament as to the meaning of Egypt. In that extraordinary book called Isaiah, which is full of psychological interpretation and offers a key almost to the earlier books of the Old Testament, it is said, "Now the Egyptians are men, and not God, and their horses flesh, and not spirit." Isaiah chapter 31, verse 3. From this we can see that if we take the narrative of the emancipation of the children of Israel as meaning psychologically the passage from a state of flesh to a state of spirit, we must understand that a mental transformation is signified. In one of the epistles in the New Testament, Paul speaks of the mind of the flesh or the carnal mind. That's in Colossians chapter 2, verse 18. "Let no man beguile you of your reward, in a voluntary humility and worshipping of angels, intruding into those things which he hath not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshy mind." Therefore, if we apply the story of the children of Israel and Egypt to an interpretation above any literal historical meaning, we can begin to understand that it is about the emancipation of a man glued to the evidence of his senses, the man of sensible facts, and his development into a new state of understanding based on principles and meanings coming from another level of insight, that is, a passage from flesh to spirit. The horse, which is what a man rides on, represents in the ancient language of parables, of which many traces exist in ancient Greek mythology, the intellect or mind. When Isaiah says that the horses of Egypt are flesh and not spirit, he gives a clue to the whole meaning of the exodus from Egypt. He enables us to understand the whole matter psychologically. Pharaoh is flesh, Moses is spirit. It is we ourselves who have to get our children of Israel out of Egypt. Since everything in esoteric psychology is about man himself and his possibilities, and with what things he has to go in himself and what things he must give up and separate himself from, we can realize that the great parables are not capable of cut and dried explanation, nor indeed are they comprehensible to us save in a small degree depending on our state of understanding, meaning apart from a literal meaning. Behind the words used lies an inner sense, but this inner sense does not fit in easily with our ordinary mind. We have to think in a new way and see connections which, although psychological, are not literally logical. In trying to comprehend some inner meaning in the story of Pharaoh and his butler and baker, we must take Pharaoh in this case as meaning a man based on his senses beginning to undergo a change in his understanding. It is, so to speak, your Pharaoh that stands firmly in the senses and their evidence. The butler and the baker represent two sides of oneself, one of which has to be hanged and one of which is redeemed. In this story we see that Egypt is transformed through the influence of Joseph, who finally becomes controller of Egypt. It is the same story as that concerning the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt, but told in another way. The psychological idea is the same, but in this case Egypt itself is brought under a new mastery. When we understand that all these parables refer to man himself and have really no historical significance, and that they must be taken apart from their literal meaning, then it is not difficult to understand that they are really speaking about the same thing, the emancipation of man from a lower level, and his transformation into a being of a higher level, although the casting of the imagery is various. The fight between serpent and horse. What we have to grasp is that the natural man, with his sensual thinking, cannot undergo the development inherently possible in him. His sensual thinking will prevent it, because it is antagonistic to psychological thinking. Unable to think psychologically, being glued to the senses, he is bound to remain an undeveloped man. Where can we find anything said about this question of sensual and psychological thinking being antagonistic? It is referred to in Genesis, chapter 49, verse 17. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backwards. The serpent is used as a symbol of sensual thinking. The heel is the lowest natural, the lowest things of reasoning from the sensual. The iniquity of my heels hath encompassed me. Psalm 49, verse 5. And in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. The serpent is the sensual understanding, and the woman here spiritual understanding. Sense and spirit are here at variance. Christ reconciled, joined the human and divine, sense and spirit. Behold, I give you power to tread upon serpents and scorpions. Luke chapter 10, verse 19. The serpents and scorpions are those who are deceitful and pretend civility with hatred in their hearts, or appear pious and in secret loathe or champion reform to gain power. What the person is and what the person appears to be are in contradiction, and so the mind is split. Deceit is the divided mind. A man speaks well and thinks evil, or does well and wills evil, and so is full of hidden poison. Deceit is malice from the will, cloaked by outward friendliness. Christ called the Pharisees, ye serpents, ye offspring of vipers. That's Matthew chapter 23, verse 33. Because outwardly they appeared good, and inwardly they were evil. This deceit penetrates the whole being of a person and renders him incapable of growth. He is dead, finished. Christ says to the Pharisees, as examples of deception, why wash the outside of the platter? Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye make clean the outside of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Matthew chapter 23, verse 25. Part 3. Faith. The word translated as faith, pistis, in the New Testament means more than belief. It means another kind of thinking. Let us take an example from the Gospels. In Matthew 16, verses 5 to 12, it is said, And when his disciples were come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. Then Jesus said unto them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. And they reasoned amongst themselves, saying, It is because we have taken no bread. Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because ye have brought no bread? How is it that ye do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that ye should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees? Then understood they how that he bade them beware not of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In this incident it is clear that the disciples took something said by Christ in its sensual meaning, that is, according to the literal sense of the words. Christ told them that this was a sign that they had little faith. It is not a question of belief. They may have believed greatly in the seen Christ, yet they had little faith. What does this mean? It means that faith is something more than belief. In this case, faith means understanding on a level other than literal understanding. Sensual understanding cannot make contact with the meanings contained in Christ's teaching. He was not speaking of literal leaven, but of psychological leaven. Christ was not speaking sensually, but psychologically. His words had no sensual meaning, but only psychological meaning. The leaven spoken of was not literal leaven, nor was bread literal bread, but falsity infecting good. Sadducees and Pharisees are always within us. The Sadducees can be compared with the scientists of today. They did not believe in any life after death. That is their leaven of falsity. The Pharisees can be compared with people who are in appearances, who, so to speak, think the important thing is to go to church on Sunday, to be seen of men. Matthew chapter 6 verse 5. That is their leaven. They were stigmatized as hypocrites without inner belief. Now Christ here connects the disciples' lack of psychological understanding and consequent inability to see what was meant with littleness of faith. In other words, Christ connects the capacity of psychological understanding with the possession of faith, and sensual understanding with littleness of faith, or even elsewhere with blindness, with complete absence of faith and inner death. Faith is necessary to open a part of the mind not opened by the senses. Let us turn now to some other passages concerning faith in its high meaning. Many may have believed in Christ as a visible miracle worker. They believed through what they saw, through the evidence of the senses. But in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1, faith is called a basis for belief in what is not seen. But faith is a basis for things hoped for, a conviction of things unseen. It is not only a conviction of things unseen, but is a basis or plane on which another world of relations and values can be reached, one that is above the seen world and the cause of it. So the unknown writer of Hebrews continues in these words: It is faith that lets us understand how the worlds were fashioned by God's word, how it was that from things unseen all that we see took their origin. Chapter 11 verse 3. The writer goes on to describe how through the possession of faith certain things have been done. Now, although it may be true that nowhere in the scriptures is faith exactly defined, but chiefly its effects, certain things are said about it as above, to show it has to do with an inner perception of scale. If faith causes a man to perceive in his mind that a world, invisible to sense, lies above the seen world and is the cause of it, then he perceives things in scale, that is, in terms of higher and lower levels. When the centurion said that he was a man who was under those above him in authority, while he himself had those who were under him in rank, and added that it must be the same with Christ, he was speaking in terms of scale. He meant that Christ only had to give orders and his sick servant would be healed. On hearing this, Christ exclaimed that never before had he met anyone who understood better what faith meant. It is related that a centurion sent messengers to Christ asking him to heal his servant. And Jesus went with them, and when he was now not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou shouldst come under my roof. Wherefore neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say the word, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, having under myself soldiers. And I say to this one, Go, and he goeth, and to another, Come, and he cometh, and to my servant, Do this, and he doeth it. And when Jesus heard these things, he marvelled at him, and turned and said to the multitude that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And they that were sent, returning to the house, found the servant whole. Luke chapter 7 verses 6 to 10. To return to Hebrews, The writer goes on to say, it is impossible to please God without faith. Chapter 11, verse 6. That is, it is impossible without the basis or foundation of faith, which makes it possible for a man to think beyond the evidence of his senses and realize the existence of invisible scale and understand psychological meaning. To realize scale means to realize that there are different levels of meaning. Literal meaning is one thing, psychological or spiritual meaning is another thing, although the words used are the same. For example, we saw that the word yeast used in the incident quoted indicated two levels of meaning. The disciples took it on the lower level and were told it was because their faith was little. Their thinking was sensual. They had difficulty in thinking in a new way on another level. And their psychological thinking was so weak just because they were based on sense and not on faith. Thus, sense and faith describe two ways of thinking, not opposites, not antagonistic, but on different levels. For without the perception of scale and levels, things are made to be opposite when they are not so, and man's mind is split into either or, which leads to endless confusions and mental wrangles and miseries. The writer goes on to say, nobody reaches God's presence until he has learned to believe that God exists and that he rewards those that try to find him. Chapter 11, verse 6. It is apparent that if scale is behind all things, if order is scale, and if to set in order is to set in scale, then what is higher and what is lower must exist. To everything there must be an above and a below. A man who cannot perceive scale, visible and invisible, as did that centurion by means of his psychological understanding due to his great faith, will be shut to the intuitions that only faith opens out to every mind that hitherto has been asleep in the senses, the limited world revealed by them. The following is from Maurice Nicoll's book, The Mark. Transformation. Meaning. At the beginning of time, meaning already was, and God had meaning with him, and God was meaning. John chapter 1, verse 1. When a man finds no meaning in anything, he has at the same time no feeling of God. Meaninglessness is a terrible illness. It has to be got over. It is the same as godlessness, because if you say there is no God, you are saying that there is no meaning in things. But if you think there is meaning, you believe in God. Meaning is God. You cannot say that you do not believe in God, but believe that there is meaning in things. The two are the same, in that one cannot be without the other. God is meaning. If you dislike the word God, then say meaning instead. The word God shuts some people's minds. The word meaning cannot. It opens the mind. Meaning was before time began. It was before creation. For creation occurs in running time, in which birth and death exist. Birth and death belong to the passage of time, but meaning was before time and creation in time began. There is no way of describing existence in the higher dimensional world outside time, save by the language of passing time, of past, present and future. Meaning is, not was, before the beginning of creation in time. It does not belong to what is becoming and passing away, but to what is above time. If then there is meaning above our heads, what is our meaning by creation? Transformation of life. The universe is not merely what the senses show. It is not the outer scene alone. In fact, it is never the outer scene alone, but always the combination of oneself with it. It is not merely the perceptions of the senses, this hard world of earth, that outer point of light in the sky, but perceptions of ideas, insights into truths, realizations of meaning, the seeing of familiar things in a new light, intuition of essences, experiences of suffering and of bliss. It is given as bread from heaven as much as fact from earth. On its grandest scale it lies beyond all command of the senses, and is only discerned inwardly in the understanding. There can suddenly be opened within the heart or in the mind a realm of experience that is not the external world, though it may interpenetrate it, and we are then bathed in the light of meaning, in that light without violence, which is pure experience, luminosity without shadow, in which the hardness of self vanishes. We see with the authority that meaning gives us. We touch without the sense of separateness and externality that all physical touch inevitably gives us. We feel in depth without talking to ourselves, without the mirror of surface personality. Every experience of that light deeply creates us. It is creating light, transforming meaning, which all have sought since the beginning of time. Light that can do no violence to anyone. Meaning that shows us what we have always known and never had the strength to remember. Not only do we feel ourselves created by every experience of that light, but this, we say, is what we are always looking for. This meaning and reality, this bliss that we have misinterpreted and sought in 1,000 useless physical directions. This is what we all desire, which the outer light of life pretends to offer, but never properly gives. This union which we perceive really is union, the secret idea behind our odd, searching, incomplete lives. How is this light obtained? How can we obtain this union with meaning? Through what does it shine? Where must the knife enter to open a way for it? It has always been spoken about. A man must begin to dissect himself away from himself to find it. This, in brief, is the substance of all teachings concerning it. And this he cannot do unless he begins to see himself directly as a new conscious experience, a new event, the daily event of himself, not analytically, not critically, nor as a source for talkativeness. This kind of consciousness, whose direction leads towards the region through which meaning is received, is not what we ordinarily have. Very much stands in our way. First in strength is imagination. We imagine we have it. The imagination is a psychic material out of which every substitute for reality can be made, the most powerful force in life. And second, we have to put into constant practice this process of using consciousness as a dissecting knife. This requires effort that is not needed in life, so we easily forget and fail to keep alive what we began. But before any such thing is conceivable, man must feel that there is an internal side of the universe drawn in through the inner senses, that he lives outwardly in nothing but a world of effects whose hidden causes lead into the mysteries beyond all human solution, and that in himself there are states unknown to him. For if a man is sense-governed, he is the wrong way round. He thinks sense prior to mind. Nothing internal can then belong to him. He has inverted the natural order. He will then deal with everything, ultimately, by violence. For the sensory object, taken as ultimate and highest reality, can be smashed, injured, blown up, or killed. That is why materialism is so dangerous psychologically. It not only closes the mind and its possible in-given development, but turns everything the wrong way round, so much so that man seriously explains the house by its bricks or the universe by its atoms, and is content with explanations extraordinarily poor of this quality. The object of every church has always been the salvation of man, and in himself man is the church, communicating with what is above and what is below, having an outer and an inner side. The great cathedrals are nothing but half beautiful, unfinished, representations of a man. But consider the knowledge that constructed them in those dark, violent, superstitious times. Consider the terrific labours and the steady intention. Something has always been kept alive and handed on from generation to generation, from church to church, from religion to religion. An idea about man, about each man, about oneself. This idea was expressed by likening a man to a seed which could not grow through the light of the natural world, i.e., by sense alone. And the salvation of man, which has always been insisted upon as necessary for the health of the whole world, meant the growth of this seed which cannot grow through the influences of ideas that belong to a mind wholly commanded by the senses. So we come back to the danger of materialism in regard to the real welfare of humanity. If there is a higher part to a man, he is not lifted to it by the ideas and customs belonging to the lower part. He must first of all accept the existence of a higher side, and then find how to imitate it. And this being so, he would expect to find, scattered about the records of history, a literature that deals with the ways and means of attaining this higher side. And of course the ideas in this literature will not be of a similar order to the ideas that belong to the lower physical side. Nothing is true until it is assimilated. Truth can only be your experience of it, not in books. There is a process of half thinking and half imagining which is very intimate. It is partly conversation with oneself, partly being oneself, partly seeing oneself and partly listening to oneself, to new meanings that are entering. It is half active, half passive, and something that is purely oneself, neither active nor passive. We rarely can pursue our own thoughts. The traffic in the mind prevents us. We do not individually join one thing with another or see the truth of something for ourselves. The rush of associations, the continual reactions to life are too powerful. Few of us will say we have built much inside. We have not recreated, re-represented the world, but left it in the form of a confused sensory image. If we notice ourselves when reading, three people are concerned. There is the reader, the person inside listening to him, and a judge. These three people are all present when we read. This listener cannot hear what outside people say. He listens to the reader and notices what the judge says. In order to recreate the world, that is, to create the world in oneself, to give it meaning, form, interpretation, order, significance, it is the listener who must learn. One takes one's ideas, one's thoughts, one's feelings, and one's power of imagination, and works internally with them, realizing that no matter what other people know or have said or have written or done, nothing has as yet happened in oneself of any value. There has been no personal assimilation of truth, no inner discovery of it, no creation in oneself. If our emotional life were more awake than the union of thought and emotion would feed this deepest and most real part of us, and we would feel the happiness that comes from the mingling of meaning with life. Our behaviour would be different because everything would present itself to us with infinitely more differences than is possible as long as we receive everything in a habitual way. Life fails to nourish us because we view it habitually through a few habits of the mind. We recognise and do little else. We call this knowing, or even truth. There is no doubt that we have, and sometimes realise, powers of reception very much finer than those we employ, and if we seek to define what development can mean, we can say that it consists in the far more conscious reception of daily life through the use of these powers, a far finer perception whose direction is towards both the inner and the outer. That would mean having continually to stand aside through a continual recognition of them, from habits of mind and feeling, to dissect ourselves from ourselves. As it is, we allow our lives to become a monotonous repetition, not seeing the cause in ourselves but in circumstances. Consciousness is unshareable. Your consciousness is your own, mine is mine own. Since consciousness is unshareable, the whole direction of one's life should be towards experiencing everything for oneself, to be conscious to oneself of oneself, to see for oneself and to be able to do for oneself. Only in this way is anything created in oneself, and once created it is one's own and is permanent and real. So everything is fresh, everything is new, everything is untouched and unspoiled by previous explorers. Everyone is at a certain stage in thought, feeling, in understanding, in experiencing. It is impossible for growth and meaning to borrow truth. To be told dogmatically what is true is to accept mass truth. It can only be an experience, according to one's stage. No one can taste an apple for you. A description of how it tastes is useless. Just in the same way, in everything that really matters, no one can really help you. Only your own power of seeing the truth of anything can help you, and it is exactly this power which we seek to throw away in the hope of finding something easier. In every situation and problem, if we could go deep enough into ourselves, away from habitual reaction, we would know what to do, because we would light upon new meaning and see the situation transformed. The chief preliminary voluntary act, and it needs to be lifelong in its voluntariness, towards the inner spirit, the source and conveyor of meaning, is that of affirmation. Only by this act does all that is outward, external, and dead become connected with what is internal and alive. This is the chief of all psychological acts. It is the preliminary and at the same time the continually renewable act whereby psychology, in the deepest sense, that is, the science of personal evolution, begins. The final goal of it, far ahead, is the unity of oneself. Man becomes gradually united through himself, with himself, and not merely with what he accidentally has become and believes himself to be. Affirmation is not by argument, but by understanding. Negation leads always to an inner deprivation, and so to an increase in superficiality, impatience, loss of meaning, and violence. One can always deny. What is easier? One can always follow the path of negation if one evades all acts of understanding as sentimental or as scientifically and commercially valueless. We know, however, better than we argue, better even than we think. But once a man sets out on the path of negation with malice, as many today, he finds on every side all the proofs and corroborations he requires. Consider the effect of suspicion in this respect. Yet the result is a lie, as we all know. The psychological effect of affirmation is entirely in the reverse direction. To grow, one must affirm. Denial as an end is violent, coercive, destructive. Now all that hidden, half-felt sidiness which can develop cannot be coerced. That is why the senses do not give us a clear proof, an unmistakable affirmation of intelligence and meaning behind the scheme of things. A clear sensory proof would coerce the mind as, say, a god visible in the bright sky. The conviction that there must be something, when it springs from the understanding, the inner intimate reflections, coerces no one. It opens the mind in certain vitally important directions. We can all be dragged down by the aspect that seen life presents, its horrors, injustice, and suffering. Take life sensorily as seen, and we can get nowhere. But that may be part of the plot of the play. Man has far more in him by birth than sense or its derivatives. Mechanical evolution cannot explain his unused or rarely used side. And if the scheme is development within the field of one's own consciousness, if each person is a potential development through the use of inherent powers, always private to himself, then we could never expect that life, as seen and given, would be of such a nature as to produce no deep problem and no lifelong struggle in him. On the contrary, we would expect that it would contradict him. Development must mean effort, and if life was sweet and beautiful, without pain or misery, there would be no incitement towards self-creation, no struggle whereby we come to recognize the finer ingredients we possess and separate them from the coarser. We slowly learn that in every situation fine and coarse are mingled. In our physical construction we have finely adjusted nervous instruments whereby we reject bad food. We have also a digestive machinery which assimilates the finer and eliminates the coarser. But in the realm of the living of our lives, a corresponding machinery does not exist. It has to be created, and this creates us. For this reason, in every age we need teaching of a special sort. What, for example, is the inner meaning of the parables in the Gospels, save an indication of how to create such a selective machinery, and so how to become men? Here is the method of self-creation. Once we understand and apply the given ideas, at this point it can be said, a man begins to exist, realizing suddenly what it means to begin to live consciously. He is no longer a creature driven to and fro by circumstances, by fashion, and by the latest craze. He is no longer so much a slave to the terrible machinery of life in which everyone is turning. He no longer thinks only in terms of a sense-engendered life. He has within him another system. By this he finds a new relation to what he experiences. Ideas different from the ideas he acquired from brute life enter and awaken his mind. And, listening, the meaning of these ideas gradually unfolds in his understanding. The first stage of a development of his whole being is set in motion. In his intimate conversation with himself, he talks to himself in a new way, and the listener in him hears and begins to stir. The facts of life do not penetrate us deeply. The listener is continually misled by them. But some ideas can penetrate to depths that we have not previously known, and stir energies that we have never experienced. Transformation of man, the salt of the earth. Many words in the Gospels are used in a special sense. We cannot suppose that the teaching given in the Gospels was anything but a special teaching, and one thing is quite plain, that the teaching in the Gospels was not about the ordinary aims of life. In giving his teaching, Christ was not speaking about how to become a successful politician, a successful businessman, a lawyer or doctor, etc. He was speaking about a special idea connected with the kingdom of heaven. He was speaking about how a man could undergo rebirth or inner evolution or transformation. And since he was speaking about a special idea about man on earth, many words were used in a special sense. That is, they were used in a technical sense, just as, let us say, an organic chemist, in dealing with the possible combinations and transformations of elementary atoms into endless new substances, speaks in a technical language, not understood by those who have no idea of chemistry, which is a science of transformation of one substance into another, and which in the early form of alchemy started from this idea, the idea of transformation. But in the case of the Gospels, what Christ spoke of was the highest form of organic chemistry, namely the possible transformation of man himself into a new man. In the Gospels, man is regarded as material for a step in inner evolution. He is regarded as an experiment in self-evolution. He is, in short, explained as material sown on earth for the kingdom of heaven, which represents that level of inner development latently possible in him. Man is sown on earth as material for self-evolution once he is brought in contact with the further sowing called the Word of the Kingdom. Therefore, man on earth, from the standpoint of the Gospels, is incomplete, unfinished, not perfect, and his deepest meaning lies in the fact that he is incomplete, but capable, through a new understanding and a new will, of reaching an inner completion. The further stage of a man cannot be reached by outer compulsion. No rules, no enforced regulations, no strict rituals, no external coercion can bring it about. The completion, the self-evolution, the rebirth, and so the fulfillment of a man can only be brought about through himself, through his own individual seeing the truth, his own understanding of it, his own desire for it, his own will applied to it. This is the supreme idea of man on earth, as taught by Christ. Sown on earth as a seed for the kingdom. In this sense, he can remain a seed, a child of earth, or he can, only by hearing a teaching similar to that given by Christ, by his own insight, his own thought, his own inner grasp, evolve or not. No one can make for him his own evolution. No exhortations, no restrictions, no penalties, no laws, no forms of outer compulsion can make him evolve in and from himself. It is his own question, a matter of his own inner choice, a matter of his deepest, most individual understanding. A man either begins to see for himself, to understand from himself, or he does not. It is all left, as it were, free for him to decide in himself and from himself. It is left free for a man to serve life or serve the kingdom of heaven. People sometimes wonder why, if what Christ taught is true, people are not made to become better, made to be good, and so on. Why, in fact, God does not insist on it. But how could this be so? If people were good from external compulsion, if they saw God in the sky and were afraid, they would be coerced. They would do nothing from themselves, from their own inner understanding and their own will, but everything from fear of being punished, and there would be no self-evolution. For this reason, there is nothing in the external world, nothing in nature, that shows a man definitely whether there is a God or not. For if the senses gave clear evidence, one way or another, a man would be compelled through the outer side of him to believe or not. But, if you will notice, there is nothing in nature, nothing in what your senses show you, that can be taken as certain evidence one way or the other. Nature is beautiful and cruel. Life is good and bad. It is impossible, starting from nature or life, to decide anything. In other words, nothing compels a man from outside. Nothing external via sense coerces him. And this fact is in itself extraordinary. You can interpret nature or life just as you please, but it is not extraordinary if you understand that man is sown on earth for the purpose of individual rebirth, individual inner development, from his own choice, from his own deepest reflection and thoughts, from his own experience, and finally his own understanding or will. In short, that he is born as material for self-evolution to the level of the kingdom. It is a question of a man's understanding, which is so insisted upon in the Gospels, namely those who have ears to hear. For a man is first his understanding, not his body, not his face, not his outer physical appearance. And second, a man is his will applied to his understanding. This is the man of the kingdom, and you must realize that a man may be far on in life and far on in knowledge, and yet have no understanding, and still less the will to live what he has seen and understood. So, seen in the light of the teaching of the higher level, that is, in the light of the teaching in the Gospels about the kingdom, about the higher man, every man is nothing but his understanding and his will in relation to it. This is the real man, in regard to the idea of the kingdom of heaven. No matter what he is externally, in position, in life, in appearance, and so on, the real man is his understanding of the teaching of the higher man and his will towards it. It is not surprising, therefore, to find that many technical words are used in the Gospels that refer to the science of the higher man or the man of the kingdom. There is, for example, the word metanoia, so wrongly translated as repentance, which means change of thinking. There is the word phronimos, wrongly translated as wise. There is the word faith, pitios, so often translated as belief. Faith and belief are two things, that is, one can have faith where one does not believe. There is the word soul, so often translated wrongly as life, as in the instance, greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. John chapter 15, verse 13. We have already given this as the supreme definition of conscious love, that a man must lay down his soul, i.e., put those whom he loves in place of himself, thus going against his soul. And in another place, John chapter 10, verse 15, Christ says, I lay down my soul, translated life, for my sheep. But we must now study another word used in a technical way that requires explanation. This is the word salt. There are several passages in the Gospels in which the word salt is used. What does salt mean? In what technical meaning was this word used? Salt is good, but if the salt have lost its savour, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and be at peace with one another. Mark chapter 9, verse 50. The teaching in the Gospels that a man should do good without any idea of reward is very difficult to understand. In one place Christ says, But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. Luke chapter 6, verse 35. But how can we do good with no idea of reward, hoping for nothing? Yet it is implied in many passages that if a man does good and keeps the commandments with the end in view of gaining happiness in heaven as a reward, he will fail in his object. Now we can understand, in regard to doing good in the wrong way, that one example is that of the hypocrite, described in Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, who makes long prayers at the street corners in order to be seen of man, and does his alms in public because he loves the praise of men before everything else. But why is the doing of good not to be seen of men, but in order to be rewarded in heaven, regarded as wrong? What is the reason? For there is always a reason for everything said in the Gospels, a psychological reason, connected with what helps or hinders a man's inner evolution. I mean that the Gospels do not contain a collection of arbitrary rules and moral precepts, but are a set of psychological charts and directions, some simple and some very complicated at first sight, which, if a man could understand them, and if he could carry out their instructions rightly, would lead him inevitably to the discovery of the kingdom of heaven in himself. Now, one of the things that is clearly said is that a man must first hear and then do what Christ teaches, that he must first understand, for to try to do anything without first understanding what it is can lead nowhere, and then he must begin to do what he thinks he has understood, that is, live it. But a man may do what he thinks he understands in the wrong way and from a wrong motive or a wrong side of himself, and it is here that the teaching that a man should do good without any idea of reward comes in. The reason why a man must not do good with the end in view of a reward in heaven is because he is then acting only from self, that is, expressed in the technical language of the Gospels, he is not acting from those emotions termed love of God and love of neighbour, but only from love of self, and because of this cannot reach the level of the kingdom of heaven. For we are made to understand that the kingdom of heaven is founded on love of God and love of neighbour, in contradistinction to the kingdom of hell, which is founded on love of self and hatred of one's neighbour. And this means that a man doing everything for the sake of an eventual reward, and so from the love of self and self-interest, can neither see nor reach the kingdom of heaven. For Christ says a man must be born again or anew before he can see the kingdom. And one meaning of that saying is that a man must get beyond self, or become poor in spirit, as the state is described in the first beatitude. Vanity, self-conceit, pride, contempt of others, and all the endless coarse and subtle emotions and their derivative faults make a man rich in spirit, and belong to the single root of the self-love, from which a man must begin to detach himself. What is the psychological significance of looking back? In the story of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot's wife looked back. She was turned into a pillar of salt. Salt signifies many psychological things, good and bad. It can kill and preserve. Christ said, "Have salt," to his disciples, arguing about who was first. But salt can conduct the meaning of psychological sterility. Christ did not mean, "Be psychologically sterile," but the reverse, as if the meaning were, "Laugh at yourselves more, do not be so serious." In this particular sense of becoming useless, one who looks back becomes internally sterile, dead, although walking. In two very strange parables, Christ connected their hidden meaning with Lot's wife. Likewise, even as it came to pass in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But in the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. After the same manner shall it be in the day that the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he which shall be on the housetop, and his goods in the house, let him not go down to take them away, and let him that is in the field likewise not return back. Remember Lot's wife. Luke chapter 17 verses 28 to 32. In these two parables we can at least see that the idea of not going back appears, and since Lot's wife is mentioned, going back and looking back must have a common meaning of inner death, inner sterileness. This cannot mean what Christ said when his disciples were quarrelling about who should be first. To them Christ said, "Have salt one with another." When the future is becoming obscure, one looks back, or goes back even to infantility, if hope is lost and replaced by fear. The illnesses that this internal retreat in one's time-body, one's life, causes are due to failure of the internal spirit which, in spite of outer difficulties, must fight, must go on. In the esoteric conception, man has an inner goal, the approach to which constitutes his real meaning, and is a matter of his inner understanding, which has to do with faith, and so is a question of the activity of the externally unsupported spirit. A man gives up spiritual striving in the real sense of he himself, and begins to look back or goes back. He is disturbed by outer trouble, so he becomes sterile and probably more successful in life. But spiritually he becomes a pillar of salt, because he gives up something indefinable and yet known to everyone internally, if they wish to know it. Is not this one of the most difficult things to see and understand in one's own case? How many little pillars of salt lie in one's time-body, in one's living past? And how many pillars of salt exist in life, walking the streets daily? What then does "have salt one with another" mean? Christ said to his disciples, "Everyone shall be salted with fire. Salt is good. But if the salt have lost its saltness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves, and be at peace one with another." Mark chapter 9 verses 49 to 50. There is the common phrase relating to a man who is not overwhelmed by life and so negative. He has good, salty talk. Salt has its meaning as what preserves, what keeps things from going bad in oneself. A man can easily take the continual changing events of life, the same for everyone, with or without salt. He can be broken, depressed by them, or not. In the case Christ spoke of, the disciples were disputing about who was the best, who was first, one of the commonest sources of self-pity, grievance, and resulting violence. Not to be able to laugh at oneself, to take oneself tragically, is absence of salt. A little wit about oneself, yes, a little of the salt of wit, will give another approach to life. Real esotericism should give a man salt as sectarian religion so rarely does. Lot's wife. The story of Lot's wife, as told in the Old Testament, has a psychological meaning. But we can, of course, regard it as a literal story, describing how a woman, by looking back, was turned into a pillar of salt. Yet this view is scarcely possible if we take into consideration a remark made in the Gospels that refers to Lot's wife. Christ is speaking in a very strange way about what he calls the consummation of the age, or the end of the world. He says, "As it came to pass in the days of Lot, they ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But in the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. After the same manner shall it be in the day that the Son of Man is revealed. In that day, he which shall be on the housetop, and his goods in the house, let him not go down to take them away, and let him that is in the field likewise not return back. Remember Lot's wife." Luke chapter 17, verses 28 to 32. Let us remind ourselves to begin with of the story of Lot's wife. You will remember how it is related in Genesis that angels came to Lot in Sodom to warn him to escape with his wife and daughters and sons-in-law before the city was destroyed because of its sin. The sons-in-law would not believe the warning, and Lot himself lingered until the angels led him and his wife and his 2 daughters out of Sodom. The narrative continues thus: "And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life, look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord. Behold now, thy servant hath found grace in thy sight, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest evil overtake me, and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. O let me escape thither. Is it not a little one? And my soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow the city of which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and that which grew up upon the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt." Genesis chapter 19, verses 17 to 26. All this has a psychological meaning and refers to the passage from one state to another in ourselves. It is all about a stage in inner development. That is, about how an individual has to leave behind him what he formerly was and what he clung to. Let us take one phrase from the narrative quoted above. The man called Lot had to leave what he was. He was beginning to evolve. He argues and bargains and wishes to go to a small city called Zoar. The angel eventually agrees and says, Haste, I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Zoar represents a new state, but it means something small. When Lot reaches this inner state, apparently less than was expected of him, it is said, the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came to Zoar. What does earth mean? In the Lord's Prayer it is said, "May thy will be done on earth as in heaven." When a man passes in his inner development to a new stage of understanding, the sun rises upon the earth. A man's earth is in himself. To evolve, a man must leave this earth, that is himself. Notice that all the cities of the plain and all that grew upon the ground were destroyed. Lot, as he was, is told that he must escape to the mountain, that is, reach something at a higher level in himself. The angel says he cannot help Lot unless he separates from his old state, called Sodom, and comes into a certain new state called Zoar. His previous state cannot be destroyed until he touches a new understanding. But Lot doubts if he is able to reach this new state of himself. "I shall not be able to escape to the mountain," he exclaims, and begs to be allowed to some extent to think and act as he used to from his former state. A new state is reached where a man not only sees for himself the truth of the esoteric knowledge that has been given, but, as it were, becomes it in his practice of life, so that it is a part of him that he cannot do without, and no longer merely something he knows or can recall to memory when he finds the time. There is a great difference, and indeed an incommensurable difference, between what a man knows and what he is. Nor can what he knows become a living part of him unless he sees the supreme good of it and realizes that the good of it is its highest aspect and far more important than the knowledge that leads to it. First he sees the truth of it, then the good of it. All esoteric knowledge is germinal in that it leads on to another stage, and in fact continually grows and transforms its meaning. So it changes in the man as the man changes, and he cannot go back and cling hold of what he once understood, for that is to return to what he has already left behind. His previous understanding will indeed now be dangerous to him. One must lose one form of life to gain a new one. Christ speaks of Lot in connection with the consummation of the age or end of the world, when the Son of Man shall be revealed. But he refers to a man's inner state and the passing from one state to another state. That is why it is said, "Whosoever shall seek to gain his life shall lose it, but whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it." Luke chapter 17, verse 33. It refers to a man reaching a certain understanding where what was holy to him ceases to have any meaning, that is, where his ordinary basis and ordinary values, what he has held as sacred, no longer have any meaning for him. Here is the point where something can take place in him. So it is said in the corresponding passage in Matthew, "When therefore ye see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let him that readeth understand. Then let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him that is on the housetop not go down to take out the things that are in his house. And let him that is in the field not return back to take his cloak. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days." Matthew chapter 24, verses 15 to 19. To find that what we once thought holy is of no value is a very difficult period. You will notice that Christ says, "Let him that readeth understand." This means that it must be understood not literally but psychologically. A man can reach a point in which he must either go on and get beyond himself, beyond what he was, or be destroyed. Lot was reluctant to move. His own city of Sodom was himself as he was. He had to move away from himself or else die. When the abomination of desolation stands in the place that is holy, then escape to the mountains is necessary, because to lose values and meaning is the worst thing. But life is meant to bring us to that point, and here esoteric teaching, the mountains, can meet you. One's former life, that is, all that is useless in it, can then be destroyed, as was Sodom, the city on the plain. The whole story is about this inner change and rebirth, about leaving the level at which one was and reaching a new level. You will remember, or you can read, that the episode of Lot and Sodom follows on a visit of 3 strange men called angels to Abraham and his wife Sarah, who have both reached the age of 90, and they are told they will have a child. Abraham is renamed Abraham and Sarah renamed Sarah, which equals princess. In both cases, a letter He, one of the sacred letters in the name Yahweh, is inserted. You must understand that the whole narrative is psychological and refers not to a literal child but to regeneration or rebirth. Sarah laughs at the angels and then denies that she did this and is not forgiven. "Nay, but thou didst laugh," one of the angels says to her. This is followed by the failure of Lot's wife in the next episode. Now, if anyone takes a step forward in evolution, what was formerly his state must be destroyed. A person cannot remain what he is and at the same time develop into a new kind of person. A seed cannot remain a seed and become a plant at the same time. So when we can see that the allegory of Abraham and Sarah refers to something new arising, a son being born, we may expect to find, in the continuation of the allegory or parable, that something must be destroyed. The new cannot be contained in the old. The new must destroy the old, taking from it what is necessary. To put new wine into old bottles is mentioned in the Gospels in illustration of this truth. However, since everyone thinks that they can change and yet remain as they are, or to put it differently, imagines that change of themselves has nothing to do with becoming quite different from what they are, it is difficult to understand that when any reference in Scripture is made to a new state, as a son being born to Abraham and Sarah, then it will naturally be accompanied by some reference to death. The new cannot come into existence save by the death of the old. You cannot remain a seed and become a tree. Because of this difficulty in understanding, people do not realize why Christ died. They do not realize that rebirth, or a new state, must mean also a death to a former state. In view of this, it is not surprising to find that as soon as the son is promised to Abraham and Sarah, there arises a question of destruction of something, in this case called Sodom and Gomorrah. It is all internal, all psychological, all about how a man can actually pass from one level to another. The names shift, the characters are varied, the scenes are different, but it is all internal, all psychological, all, as it were, in the language of parables or dreams, and referring to the same inner process as, for example, in the Pilgrim's Progress, which is told in the similitude of a dream, that is, in that language. But it is all about one person, a man, in his internal life and development. Let us notice that Abraham, now become Abraham, pleads with God for the preservation of Sodom. He says, "Wilt thou consume the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou consume and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein?" When God agrees to this request, Abraham pleads again for the city to be saved, even if there are only 45 righteous men, and then if only 40 can be found, and then if only 30 can be found, or even only 20. Finally he says, "Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure only 10 shall be found there." And God answered, "I will not destroy it for 10's sake." And then let us notice that Lot is unwilling to leave Sodom. The idea is the same. It is with great reluctance that we leave what is familiar and natural and easy. It is difficult to understand anew. It is difficult to abandon one's merit and virtue and feeling of success. It is very hard to see our filthiness, that is, Sodom in us, lies just in this merit and self-love, and this ascription of everything to our own cleverness. The inhabitants of Sodom thought they could have intercourse with angels, that is, that they were equal to them in understanding. Lot knew better. He takes the angels into his house and shuts the outer door on the men in the street. This represents an act of inner realization, namely, a distinction between what is valuable and what is worthless. Lot can distinguish those personalities in himself that were worthless and nothing but different experiences of self-love. They were outside his inner understanding, and he shuts the door on them. You must understand that the self-love is different from the love of neighbour or the love of God. These are the 3 stages of development. A man to develop has to leave the first stage because all that is formed and laid down by the genius of self-love is wrongly connected. It is simply a bad bit of machinery. This is Sodom. Consider what arises from the undisciplined and unrecognized self-love. From it come all the delights of power and possession, whether on a big or on a small scale. From it arises every kind of appearance, every sort of deceit, falseness, lying, and external pretence. And from it more deeply come hatred, revenge, the unpleasant pleasure in harming others, all sorts of cruelties and making mischief, which can give a secret feeling of power to the self-love and inflate it. All this is Sodom, whether viewed in the realm of a man's thought, or in the realm of his feelings, or in the realm of his actions. For the change of a man into another state of being, he must leave this former state. So Lot must leave Sodom, and the angels warn him that he cannot linger, that once set out on his journey he must not look back. The journey is a psychological journey, for when a man passes from his previous inner state to a new one, he has gone a journey from one state of himself to another. These journeys on a small scale are always taking place in us. Things are always moving in us. But here it is a journey from a lower to a higher level. Lot must leave the plain and go to the mountains, and this means that nearly everything in him that is related to his previous level must die or be abandoned. A man is related or connected to different sides of himself in different ways. Just as he has outside relations in the external world, such as mother, father, wife, daughter, son, and so on, so has he relations in his internal world of thoughts, feelings, and desires, of ideas, aspirations, of different glimpses of truth and of knowledge, of different states of himself, of different wishes, different insights, different perceptions, different aims, and so on. Lot's wife is a relationship or connection in Lot that had to become sterile. It was a fruitful connection with Sodom. The death of this intimate relation is represented by Lot's wife looking back and being turned into a pillar of salt. The subject in all the above quotations concerns the violation of esoteric truth. Like everything else, it can be misunderstood. It can fall not only on the wrong people, who will violate it and so make it more useless, but it can fall on the wrong place in a man himself, for a man is not one person but many people. He has many different sides to himself. In consequence, he may get hold of a thing wrongly, not having the necessary quality of understanding, and turn the whole thing into ridicule. Then his state is worse than the first state. If esoteric knowledge were on the same scale as ordinary knowledge that we can acquire from any school or university, the botching of it would produce its own obvious results. We say simply that the man has failed, that he does not understand a subject, he is no good at it. But in the case of esoteric knowledge and the psychological development that can take place from it, if it falls on good ground, the understanding is quite different, because if it is botched, a person's possibilities of a real development of understanding are permanently ruined. If we take the story of Lot and Sodom as applying to the individual himself and the various sides of him, and if we can even vaguely comprehend the opening and shutting of doors as applying to a person's inner and outer understanding, we can realize it is about a man separating himself from these factors in himself that are useful or useless for his inner evolution. All those elements in a man that wish to deny the existence of a definite psychological evolution press sore upon the man, even Lot, and draw near to break the inner door, and so ruin his understanding. This is psychological violation which the whole episode deals with. Everyone has in him great sources of denial that in the further evolution that leads to transformation will inevitably make war against him. But these elements in this narrative are shown as being made blind so that they cannot find the door. This means that at a certain stage of temptation a man receives help. He receives help from the higher level he is struggling to reach, and the antagonistic elements are, as it were, misdirected or blinded. This refers to a certain stage in his inner life. At first the door is almost broken down, but once he has accepted the two men, once they are inside him, he is helped, because in the narrative it says that the men put forth their hand and brought Lot into the house to them and shut the door. Genesis chapter 19, verse 10. Another example of what might be called typical recurring ideas in esoteric psychology is the use of the word street. The men that Lot has to struggle against are in the street. They demand that the two visitors should come out into the street that we may know them. Verse 5. This latter expression contains in the Hebrew a sexual meaning. Expressions such as he knows him refer on the literal level to sexual intercourse. But all unions of any kind can be expressed in such terms. In the language of images, in the language of esoteric allegory and parables, literal images are used to convey psychological meanings. The point made is that the men in the street must not have any kind of union with the two visitors who are inside Lot's house. The idea of man as a house containing many rooms is a very ancient image. The inner constitution of a man is compared to a house with rooms on different levels. The men in the street in this narrative represent external sides of Lot. They represent those elements in him which have external understanding based on their external world as given through the senses. The knowledge of esoteric psychology cannot be sown on this side of a man because the outer side contradicts the development of the inner side of a man. A man must realize that there is something else apart from what he beholds in the world. If he takes everything as he sees it happening, he will be extremely external and have no inner reflection. Esoteric psychology in its action begins when a man perceives that there must be something else apart from what his senses show him. Otherwise he will always be dragged down by the events of life and will be unable to form in himself anything that can resist the chaos of outer life. This is why the men in the street must be resisted. The same idea is met with in the parable of the sower and the seed. The sower went forth to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and it was trodden under foot, and the birds of heaven devoured it. Luke chapter 8, verse 5. The truth, the knowledge of this further evolution of man, that is the subject of esoteric psychology, must not fall by the wayside in a man. It must not fall on those parts of him that are in the street, on those sides of him concerned with outer life only. The most external side of man is that side of him that deals with the world as he sees it, with the daily tasks, with the effect of appearances on him. Esoteric knowledge must fall more deeply than this. It must touch an inner side in a man, and once it touches a deeper side there will inevitably start a struggle between the inner understanding and the outer understanding. So Lot has to struggle with the men in the street because he has reached a stage in which something quite definite can happen to him, and he is at once in the danger of losing what inner understanding he has. In fact, his inner understanding is in great danger of being violated by his outer understanding. When his two visitors come to him, they say they will abide in the street all night, and he urged them greatly, and they turned in unto him and entered into his house, and he made them a feast. Verse 3. This means that he could understand the difference between what is simply of life and what belongs to esoteric knowledge. He understood that there was a development possible for him, but he had to insist on the reality of it. He had to affirm it, and so he pressed them greatly to come into his house, and they consented. Once inside the house, they made it possible for him to resist those in the street. That is, they made it possible for him to resist all his doubts, all those sides that could never understand. But Lot is in that state in which he cannot break away from himself, and still wishes to come to terms. He is not strong enough to separate himself from his life understanding, and so he offers his 2 daughters to the men in the street. Verse 8. You must understand, of course, that this is not literal. It means that he wished to make a compromise. He knew that esoteric truth must not be violated, and guards it, but he has not the strength to rely on it fully. The daughters represent 2 points of contact in him belonging to the side of feeling rather than the side of knowledge. He does not offer his 2 daughters to the 2 visitors, but to the men in the street, although they are his daughters, and so intimate sides of himself in the realm of feeling. Later on, these 2 daughters have intercourse with him and produce a new side of himself. The 2 visitors insist that he leave Sodom, which means his present state. They urge him to leave quickly, but Lot tarries, and when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy 2 daughters which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. But he lingered, and the men laid hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth, and set him without the city. Verses 15 to 16. The city is then destroyed. All those elements that are useless in regard to this possible transformation of a man are destroyed. There is only a further reference to the men in the street, being blinded and unable to find the door, but the psychological story depicts a man who cannot face fully all those inner changes that are necessary for transformation. It is a story about a man who has reached a certain level and is drawn up from one side and kept down from another side. He still wishes to compromise with the men in the street, and that side of him represented by his wife, which means some intimate affection still wishes to go back. The angels tell him he must escape to the mountain, that is, to a higher level of himself, but he cannot do it. The angels in him, the higher understanding, say to him, Escape for thy life. This is not the physical life, but the psychological life, and they add, Look not behind thee, neither stay thou in all the plain. Escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. Verse 17. But Lot complains. He does not wish to go to the mountain. In fact, he is afraid to do so. He says, I cannot escape to the mountain, lest evil overtake me and I die. Verse 19. He feels he is not able to reach this higher level in himself, and if he tries to do so, he will die. He will die psychologically, not having strength to live on this new level. He begs to be allowed to go to a small city. He feels he is only capable of a very small change and cannot endure what he is asked to do, and knows that he should do. So he argues with the transforming forces in him, and says to them, Behold now, this city is near to flee unto, and it is a little one. O let me escape thither. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? Verse 20. The angels agree, and one says, Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything until thou become thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. Verse 22. Zoar means smallness. No one can escape from himself unless he has somewhere to go to. A man cannot change himself unless he has already something new to go to. Before the old can be destroyed, something new must be present itself. Lot, both understanding and reluctant, could not go to the mountain, but had enough formed in him of what was new to take refuge in. This is Zoar. And his reluctance is shown by his wife's turning back to the former state. He has been told not to look behind him or to stay in the plain. The narrative says that the sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Verse 23. This is the language of the new state. Lot reached a new state, a little one called Zoar. His earth was illuminated by this new state. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot came into Zoar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire, and he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon the ground. Verse 24-25. The old state was completely destroyed. All that grew upon the ground, upon the plain, was destroyed. All that side of Lot was destroyed. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. Verse 26. Salt has different meanings in the esoteric language of parables, but here it means something quite sterile, quite dead. All Lot has left to him were the 2 daughters. We are then told that Lot feared to dwell in Zoar, but dwelt in a mountain in a cave with his 2 daughters, and that through them he propagated when he had been made drunk with wine. All this narrative depicts the terrific struggle in a man, and in a sense how he failed, and how all that he gave rise to eventually was wrong. But the essence of this struggle is depicted in the scene in Sodom between the men in the street and the angels inside the house. What we have to understand is that it is a real description of the different stages in esoteric psychology. It deals with the inner states of a man who is beginning to undergo individual evolution. It deals with psychological rebirth. It is not historical any more than anything in the Gospels is historical. It is not literal but psychological, and it was written by people who knew about esoteric psychology. To take it literally is to abuse its meaning completely, and taken in this way will only disgust the reader. Transformation of meaning. Let the dead bury their dead. Matthew chapter 8, verse 22. Surely, says St. Augustine, these dead buriers are not dead in body, for if this were so, they could not bury dead bodies. Yet doth he call them dead? Where but in the soul within? For as we may often see in a household itself sound and well, the master lying dead, so in a sound body do many carry a dead soul within, and them the apostles arouses thus, Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light. This is from Augustine's Sermon 38. Man can be alive on this earth and yet be dead at the same time. In the last text quoted by St. Augustine, which occurs in the 5th chapter of Ephesians, verse 14, the emphasis is first placed on awakening from sleep. A man must awake first. He must rise out of his ordinary state, which is compared to a state of death or sleep, and then light can reach him. People find difficulty in not taking everything literally, especially what is written or said with a meaning beyond the words themselves. They can understand more easily the underlying meaning expressed in allegorical pictures, that is, visual allegory, as in the daily cartoons, but not allegory in words. Thus, the dead to them are the actual dead. Awaking is waking up in the morning, and sleep is sleep in bed. The deaf, the blind, and the lame are actually deaf, blind, and lame people. And the idea always seems to them far-fetched that there is an outer person in us, the body, who may actually be deaf, owing to disease of the ears, or blind owing to disease of the eyes, or lame owing to injury to the legs, and also an internal or inner man who may be deaf, although the outer ears are not diseased, and who may be blind although the sight is unimpaired, or lame although the physical legs are strong. This step in the transformation of meaning from the sensual or sensory level to the emotional and mental levels is one of the activities referred to as faith. We walk, Paul said, by faith and not by sight, 2 Corinthians verse 7. Even if we believe we understand what this means, when it comes to the point, all of us walk by sight, that is, the literal, apparent meaning of everything has the greatest power over us. So people take always one another's actual words up, not the meaning behind them. For St. Augustine, and many more before and after him, the sick, the deaf, and the dead in the Gospels are the sick and deaf and the dead within. And in speaking of the 2 blind men who, sitting by the wayside as Jesus was passing, cried out and asked that their eyes might be opened, he asks if we can really suppose that this is merely an account of a miraculous event concerning 2 physically blind men. Why does it say that the crowd tried to restrain them, and that they fight against it and insist on attracting the attention of Jesus. They overcame the crowd, who kept them back, by the great perseverance of their cry, that their voice might reach the Lord's ears. The Lord was passing by, and they cried out. The Lord stood still, and they were healed. For the Lord Jesus stood still and said, What will ye that I shall do unto you? They said unto him, That our eyes may be opened. Matthew chapter 20, verses 30 to 34. The blind here are those who cannot see but wish to see. Augustine says that they are those who are blind in their hearts and realize it. Like the deaf, like the sick and the dead, the blind are a certain kind of people. They are, in this case, people in a certain inner state, knowing they are blind and wishing to see clearly. Cry out among the very crowds, he says, and do not despair. Who are these two blind men who know they cannot see, but who recognize the spiritual meaning typified in the person of Jesus? What individual functions of the soul are shown here that struggle with the crowd of commonplace meanings and thoughts, and finally, by their own determination, receive their power of vision? If 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, said Christ, Matthew chapter 18, verse 20. What 2 sides of ourselves must first take part, that our eyes may be opened, that is, our understanding? Why 2 to make it effective? There are, Swedenborg says, 2 sides of a man which must awaken and grow together if he seeks regeneration: the mind and the will. One side is characterized by the general term truth. The function of the intellect is to seek truth, to distinguish it from falsity and lies. The other side is characterized by the word good. Truth without good is useless. It is blind, ruthless, cruel, harsh, domineering. Truth feeds on good and good on truth. Truth only can live from good. In a bad world, where there is no good but only violence, truth cannot continue to live. It will be twisted into falsity, into lies, then lies will seem truth. The will blindly always seeks good, but according to its own quality. It is either a good or an evil will, and seeks correspondingly, i.e., it always seeks what it regards as good. So the human struggle is between different sorts of good, and no one seeks evil deliberately. The affection for truth and the affection for good must increase together for a man to develop normally, and the heavenly marriage whereby a man becomes a unity is that of good with truth and truth with good. Again, every man is first 2 men, an external man and an internal man. These at first are or appear to be fused, just as if they were one. Only when a man begins to reflect on his life and on the kind of man he is, and on his actions and speech and intentions, does the internal man begin to become separated from the external, and conscience can stir in him. This is a necessary state preliminarily to the first stage of regeneration. Let it be again said that regeneration is the supreme idea of man. It is the true evolution of man. A man, in this sense, is not a violent external creature, more cunning or stronger than others, a principal animal. What a man is according to his understanding. And unless the inner man is separated from the outer, a man remains incapable of becoming a man. He is incapable of understanding, which begins originally, perhaps, only by standing under oneself, and this may be the inner sense of the word, which is unknown etymologically. The parable or incident of the 2 blind men comes at the end of a chapter, Matthew chapter 20. 2 parables precede it, both about being first. The opening parable likens the kingdom of heaven to a householder who sends labourers at intervals to work in his vineyard. For the kingdom of heaven is likened to a man that is a householder, which went out early in the morning to hire labourers into his vineyard. And when he had agreed with the labourers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the 3rd hour, and saw others standing in the marketplace idle. And to them he said, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing. And he said unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? They say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard. And when even was come, the lord of the vineyard said to his steward, Call the labourers, and pay them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. And when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received every man a penny. And when they received it, they murmured against the householder, saying, These last have spent but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat. But he answered and said to one of them, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny? Take up that which is thine, and go thy way. It is my will to give unto this last, even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Or is thine eye evil, because I am good? So the last shall be first, and the first last. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. The other parable is taken from an incident in which the mother of 2 of the disciples asked Christ that they should sit in the highest places in the kingdom. Command that these my 2 sons may sit, one on thy right hand and one on thy left hand in thy kingdom. The 10 other disciples are indignant. Christ says to them that in life people occupy high places and exercise authority over one another, but that amongst them it must not be so. Ye know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Not so shall it be among you, but whosoever would become great among you shall be your minister, and whosoever would be first among you shall be your servant, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 to 28. Then follows the incident of the 2 blind men. And behold, 2 blind men sitting by the wayside, when they heard that Jesus was passing by, cried out, saying, Lord, have mercy on us, thou Son of David. And the multitude rebuked them, that they should hold their peace. But they cried out the more, saying, Lord, have mercy on us, thou Son of David. And Jesus stood still, and called them, and said, What will ye that I should do unto you? They say unto him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. And Jesus, being moved with compassion, touched their eyes, and straightway they received their sight, and followed him. Matthew chapter 20, verses 30 to 34. Both the parable of the vineyard and the private teaching given following the request of the mother of the 2 disciples show man is blind to the nature of the kingdom of heaven. Man cannot understand what it is. The mother of the sons of Zebedee is shown as thinking of it as being like an earthly kingdom with all its pomp and pride of position, and the labourers in the vineyard cannot understand it. It does not seem fair or just to them. They are all treated in the same way. Those that came to work last are given the same reward as those who came first. The whole distinction made by the natural human mind about justice is removed at a stroke. In fact, it is called evil. Is thine eye evil because I am good? Asked the master of the vineyard of the first comers who were complaining to him. And he adds, So the last shall be first, and the first last, as if this were a necessary state of things, the realization of which had to be brought about in the human mind to replace its ordinary conceptions. The parable is about our ordinary ways of thinking, our mental concepts, whereas the comparison made in connection with the request of the mother of Zebedee's sons has to do with the vain side of man, nourished by the mother, with his self-emotions. his desire to triumph over others and satisfy his mother's darling's wishes, his inevitable and necessary firstness with his mother. Intellectually, man is blind, and emotionally, man is blind to the idea of the kingdom of heaven. Swedenborg, in his tremendous interpretation of the opening books of the Old Testament, bases their significance upon the need for overcoming the psychologically maternal in man, that is, all that is derived from birth through woman in man, and takes it as an esoteric document of the highest man, Christ, evolving internally. Strangely enough, this is not understood, possibly even by those who follow his teaching. Suppose the two blind men, the crowd, the outcry, and Christ passing and standing still represent man at a certain stage of evolution. Can the inner state of a man be represented more simply than by means of visual description and allegory, just as the political situation is explained at a glance by a cartoon? Of what import would the bare incident be, when it is so often stated that the blind were healed? The description follows upon two illustrations of defects in human nature, one very hard to grasp theoretically, and the other easier to understand though extremely difficult to deal with practically. Both these defects have to do with the human idea of being first. Both are connected with another idea, the notion of the first being last, of the master being servant. It cannot be merely sentimental in meaning. If the direction of human development called Kingdom of Heaven is so difficult even to grasp that it requires every kind of analogy to indicate it, all the practical teachings, that is, the methods, will be also very difficult to understand. Now, evolution is to come into a new state of being, one that is higher. The evolution of man is the unfolding, the unrolling of man, just as the evolution of a seed or egg is the unrolling of the tree or bird, the unfolding of the full being. The being of a seed is different from the being of a tree, and the being of an egg is different from the being of a bird. Their destinies or uses are also different. Throughout the New Testament, man is compared to a seed. Otherwise, there could be no doctrine of evolution, no real firm basic idea about man, and so no real eternal psychology of man beyond all temporary fashions and notions. Man comes from a seed, and a man is again himself a new seed. That is, man as he is by birth and natural growth is not full man, evolved man, being a seed himself, the latent seed of himself, having all the requisite physiological and also psychic functions of thought, feeling, insight, consciousness, etc., that can bring about his own unfolding into evolved man or full man. All real psychology, all true science of the soul is about this new seed, man himself. If we imagine this progress, we can realize that it is not in time, but in some other direction. What does this mean? The parable of the laborers in the vineyard seems to be based on the argument from time. Some worked a longer time than the others. Is then one of those blind men who cries out and fights with the crowd in himself a side of man nearing a new realization of life and aware of a higher range in himself, which begins by understanding that time is what prevents him? The passage of time is not evolution. It is not the quantity of effort, but its quality that marks the development. Time is not progress, and length of time is nothing by itself. Evolution, development, is a higher or deeper form of a thing. It is a movement towards something above what a thing is, not to something tomorrow. It is a moving towards what is more internal, towards what is deeper experience, to greater integrity and purity of vision, to quality and not mere quantity.